Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode number 64 of the Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. Of course, welcome us with Chad Wehrs here, and I'm Bob Harris, and we're going to take all your questions and do what we can do to answer your questions. Well, we're only a couple weeks away from the IMCA Super Nationals. Looking forward to that. That's always a great time. It's a little exhausting, but it's always a great time. You get to see a lot of people that you only get to see once a year, or that's about the only time you get to see them is at the Super Nationals. So that's pretty cool. Get to hang out with my buddy Chad because I'm assuming we'll be next to each other. I haven't seen a lineup an outline of where we're at or anything, but so we'll have to see, but I'm assuming that that's where we'll be. I can't believe that they'll I don't see any reason for them to make a change. So we'll be there. We'll have our new 2023 IMCA GRT by BHE Sport Mod there on hand. And of course, Chad's got some new products that can't release until the Super Nationals because that's the release date. You got just one little thing you could kind of salt us with a little bit, or kind of give us a little sugar, maybe?
Well, there's a new an engine stand that we're debuting that's pretty trick. So
awesome.
That's one of the new items that we're debuting there, and they're getting the display ready for that. So that's pretty exciting. And otherwise, I've been gone. I've been on vacation for a week, so I'm kind of out of the loop. I don't know what they're working on now or where they're at, but we got to get caught back up. I know I came back to the surprise the new 25th anniversary T-shirts are in. So
awesome.
Cool. When we got back tonight.
Cool.
So we'll have those ready to rock and roll in Boone, and I see they got the new koozies are here. So starting the 25th anniversary party, I guess, and at the Super Nationals. So
awesome. Well, that'll be exciting. So where'd you go on vacation? What'd you do?
Well, it was kind of a mixed up mess. So it was kind of a workcation. Spent a couple days at my place on the river, the camper, and then spent 4 days working at the hunting land, trying to get that ready for hunting season, and then spent the last 3 days in Wisconsin Dells, wet and wild. So kind of all over. I'm ready to get back to work and some normalcy instead of trying to chase them two boys around. So somewhat exciting at times.
Yeah, and they're getting taller all the time, so that's got to be getting to be a different challenge than before.
Well, they're getting better at sports. I still got it. I beat them in bowling, and I beat them twice in mini golf. So the old boy still got her. So I suppose next year they'll probably start beating me. So
yeah, that's for sure. That's inevitable. I don't even do anything with Bobby anymore. He beats me on everything. So he's even a better fisherman, and I haven't figured that deal out at all. I mean, he doesn't spend any time watching any of them videos, or doesn't put it in the time. He just goes fishing and catches fish. I'm like, damn. But he was kind of always that way, even in school. He was always a relatively decent athlete, and always succeeded at whatever he challenged himself to. So that was pretty cool. Well, hi, Scott. How's things going with Scott? Jason's hello. And so what else is new and exciting at Wehrs Machine? Of course, you don't know because you've been working.
Yeah, not sure. Hopefully tomorrow's meeting won't be too long.
There you go. The short meetings are always a pleasant thing.
Yeah.
Well, Jacob has got a question. He says he wants to know how to get more side bite. Side bite's kind of an interesting thing, and I've explained this to numerous people. Side bite's basically corner entry. When you get into the corner, the car kind of sticks the right rear and kind of sticks the whole car right then. once you're on the power, you're actually dealing off of forward bite and not side bite. So a lot of these people will talk about, well, I need more side bite coming off the corner. Well, actually, side bite's not what you need. You actually need more forward bite, or you need to keep the car from tailing out, which is more traction rather than that. So how to get more side bite, it's, you can do numerous things with that. I mean, panhard bar changes is usually my first go-to on that. We've even went to the point where we've moved lead from the center of the car to the right of the car. And it looks like everybody just came on. We got all kinds of questions now. But anyway, that's kind of one of the things. But the biggest thing, like I said, when you're back on the throttle and the car's trying to tail out on you, that's actually more of a forward traction issue than it is a side bite issue. Grooving and siping, when is too much? Well, Mark, it's a situation there where, I think you kind of got to go off of your racetrack, because certain racetracks, you can do a little better job with grooving them. I kind of tend to like the grooving a little bit better than I do the siping, but I still also do the siping too. Siping, though, is what I have found on some racetracks that are pretty aggressive. You might not want to sipe as much, just because of the fact that sipes sometimes will help tear the tire, and you don't want to sipe too narrow on racetracks that are real slick, because then there isn't as much grip. So I don't know if I'm the actual guy for that tire deal, but I know one thing that's very important about the fact is opening up the existing tread width, like on the IMCA tires, a good deal. Putting another tread around the outside of the tire to get more side bite out of the actual tire itself is a good idea. Do you guys use right front brake shutoffs? If so, if no, please explain your choice. Jason, actually, I don't. We installed a brake shutoff in a car that we had built for UMP, but in the IMCA world, we cannot actually run a brake shutoff, and I don't remember the brand that we even got for the UMP car. I can't answer that question. I'm not very knowledgeable with that right front brake shutoff thing. I do know that you definitely don't want to step on the brakes and then hit the brake shutoff, because it locks up the right front wheel. I've seen people do that, which actually looks kind of funny, because they're trying to go out of the roll out of the infield, and the right front wheel is locked solid because they hit the switch when they were on the brakes, so it locked the fluid in the brake. So you got to be a little careful about that. But I'm not the guy to talk to. Is there an advantage to powder coating a new chassis versus painting? Well, I like a powder coat. I think there's just something about that powder coat, and that heat relieves some of the stress in the chassis. And I don't know. When we went from painting them to powder coat, I felt our cars got better. And I think it's just, in the way when I owned Harris Auto Racing and we were building cars, we had two different guys building cars, and they both went in a different order. And for some reason or another, when we were painting them, it seemed like one guy's car had a certain characteristic to it, and the other guy's car had a different characteristic to it. When we went to the powder coat process, that eliminated that. Both cars became equal cars. It didn't make any difference. Now, do I believe this was half in my head? It could have been. I don't know. It's one of those deals where it just seemed like there was an inconsistency the way we were building them between the two builders. And of course, then we finally went to the point where we both had them do everything in the same sequence, and that worked a lot better too.
You missed Buddy Ray.
Yeah, I did. Buddy Ray, at full droop on an IMCA Sport Mod, should both bars be straight forward? Well, yeah, I still wouldn't mind seeing a little bit toe in, but I think Chad can answer this one a little better because I know you've got an example of a guy you helped down in Arizona one time with that bar toe.
Yeah, the bar toe is definitely very important. The sport mods, I think you start like an inch in at the front. Uh, just you always want them to point in at dynamic. If the right side one is pointed towards the right side door and you hit the fuel, when you accelerate, the force kind of goes through the bars, whatever direction they're going at. So
Right.
if the right side, we had a guy in Vegas a few years back that couldn't line up, nothing would change the way the car was working. Well, his right side spacers on his frame were flopped. So in dynamic, the right side bars were pointed towards the middle of the door. So every time you hit the fuel, the car automatically wanted to be tight. So bar toe is definitely important. Sport mod, start them both facing towards the inside, and that should be fine. The 4-lane cars, we like to be straight on the left rear. The bottom right rod would be straight, and then the top right rod is inboard on the chassis side.
Okay, Taylor's got a question. When running a coilover on the left rear on IMCA mod, is it better to take some chain out of the right rear so that it doesn't pogo stick on the center of the exiting the corner? Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of chain on the right rear to begin with. That's one of those situations where we set the chain to the point where it's right before the car goes off the spring so that there's just minor tension on the spring. Otherwise, what can happen is you start tying that right rear chain down, and it's going to do that povo sticking effect. The other thing, sometimes if you get too much bar angle on the right rear, that can cause them things to povo stick a little bit. But usually, when running the chain, that's the case. If you get on a racetrack that's got a little character to it, the car can povo stick. So I don't recommend a lot of chain on the right rear. We kind of do it more with shock absorbers. That seems to be still gives us some advantages without the chance of the povo sticking thing. Zachary, how can I get my 03 Hilson to roll on the right rear? Well, that's a great question. It's like every other type of a car. You can run a little softer shock over there, move a little weight to the right side a little bit. Those type of things seem to work pretty good. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, raising the lead or possibly lowering the spring table on the right rear to get it to roll onto the right rear.
Yeah. Spring tables, very good idea. Paul, can you explain characteristics of adjusting the tooling bars on the birdcage versus the chassis and how it affects handling of the car? Thank you, guys. Anytime you do something on the rear end compared to, like, if you move it on the rear end on the cage compared to on the chassis, you're doubling the timing aspect of it. So in other words, if you move one hole on the rear end, it's basically going to have about the same effect as moving 2 holes on the chassis, just because the timing is so much quicker. That being said, sometimes it's a good idea, and what we actually do a lot of times on the right rear, to keep angle in the car, keep angle in that right rear bar, we'll actually raise it up on the cage and then raise it up on the chassis so that the car still has good steer in it. But the closer you get to the housing, it seems like it gives the car more traction up off the corner. Left rear, we tend to do the opposite, move it further away from the housing so that there's more of a leverage factor to keep that left rear angle in there, and so we can get traction coming up off the corner. Yep, I was thinking you were talking about sport mod, Paul. Sean, Chad, do you have any shock extension setups? Looking for a setup for the left front. Not sure what's the best option and what all people offer.
So most of the shock manufacturers make their own extensions. We have a half 20 extension that we use on our sliders that I think fits. God, now I don't even know what shock brand has a half 20 again.
Oh,
I don't remember, but our slider one fits one of them brands. I'm not 100% sure, but most of the shock companies make shock extensions. I assume you're talking about the ones that screw on the shaft to make it longer or shorter. So I don't know what you're running for shocks, but I would look that direction.
Yeah, I know. Like, we stock 1 inch and 2 inch extensions, and normally we use an extension on the left front, and sometimes we use an extension on the left rear. On the right front camber and caster, or caster and camber, 7.5 camber and 11, 7.5 caster and 11 camber are the going thing. Well, that sounds a little steep to me. I would never put that much caster or camber in the car. You know, as a rule of thumb, I like to see no more than 5. Sometimes with the 3-piece spindles, we will run as much as 6 on a right front, depending on what feel the driver's looking for. But camber wise, you know, we're in the 7.5 degree range is pretty common on IMCA modified or an IMCA sport mod. Scott, when moving the lift bar left or right of center, do you move the J bar up or down? Is the same more or less? I don't know if moving the lift bar would actually really affect the J bar. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think so. Generally, on a lift arm car, you don't have a lot of room to move it left or right. I don't know if maybe we're talking pull bar car, but I know the lift arm cars generally it's one single tube down the frame. Some are built where you can go left and right, but the drive shaft dictates where the lift arm is pretty much all the time.
And
so
I'm going to guess that Scott's probably talking about just the actual lift. I mean, like a pull bar or on a sport mod, the solid upper link, the third link. And I've never had to adjust the panhard bar because of the fact of moving it one way or the other. Further you move it to the right, the car is going to be tighter on corner entry. Further you move it to the left, it's going to be tighter on corner exit, but freer on corner entry. And in that case, if you do move it to the left, you might, with it being freer, and that's a good point, you might want to put a little bit more panhard bar in it just in case, to try to keep the side bite in the car, because when you move it to the left, you are going to lose a little bit of side bite. I think Zachary wants to know, what can I do to make my car roll better? Well, I kind of think we've kind of talked about that. We've talked about lowering the spring table on the right rear. We've talked about moving some weight. You can put a little bit more panhard bar angle in it. That's going to help it get to roll a little bit more. Ryan, why would a 4-link modified be picking up the front end off the ground as it goes down the straightaway and then slamming down when you get off the throttle on corner entry? Well, if it's picking both front tires off the ground, you got a ton of freaking bite, man. That thing's got mega traction. I'm going to assume you're probably talking more of lifting the left front and slamming the left front down. More than likely, that's probably some angles. You might need to increase the right rear angle to kind of a right rear upper bar angle to help that. But most of the time when I find those cars are doing that, the rear end is too far to the left. And what's happening is the car is getting so much side bite that when you get on the throttle, the right rear is closer to the center of gravity or the roll center. So it actually kind of rolls the car on the right rear and then unloads the left front and tilts the left front up in the air. That's kind of the new thing in the stock cars all of a sudden now, but they're even starting to find out that by doing that, you don't have a whole lot of control. And like I said, more than likely, that's rear end is just too far to the left is what I've found whenever I've had that problem. Spencer, USRA B mod. The car is just a touch tight on corner entry when the throttle's picked up. What do you recommend changing without sacrificing much for forward drive off exit? Well, your USRA guys can run a spacer. I'd try a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch right rear wheel spacer would be one thing I would try. I would probably tweak my panhard bar a little bit because tweaking your panhard bar, raising it a 1/4 of an inch or whatever might be a good thought. That's not going to affect your traction off. It's just going to help the car be a little bit better in. Shock package. Once again, I keep going back to shocks. I mean, it could be a deal where not knowing what your left rear shock is, you might want to talk to your shock builder and have him put a little bit more rebound in the shock, because maybe what's happening is when you get on the throttle, it's unloading and loading the left rear too fast. And so maybe slowing that down just a little bit on corner entry might be a good thought. I don't see that affecting your drive off the corner. We've kind of went to that a little bit more rebound here as of late. I don't know whether it's a difference in the racetracks or whatever, but that's kind of been a trend here. Joshua, what's you running for spring on the right front now in sport mods? I know everyone is going really soft now. What's your opinion on that right front spring rate? Depends on your race car itself. Now, like our new GRT stuff with the 3-piece spindles, we're running a 500-pound spring up there. It seems like if we go a whole lot stiffer, the car gets a little throttle tight in the middle of the corner. It doesn't seem to want to get over in the right front as much and let the car turn. Our older cars that had the single-piece pinto spindle, we ran a 550 on those cars, but the roll center in those cars is a little bit different. So kind of need to kind of go by what your chassis builder recommends, and then just actually do some experimenting. But that's where we're at. Like I said, with the 3-piece spindle stuff, we're at a 500-pound spring. And with the pinto spindle stuff, our cars are at 550. Anthony, because they're back on the throttle, transferred back, then they brake to slow it down for corner. Okay. Because they're on the throttle, transferred back, then they brake it to slow it down for the corner. Okay. Jeff, best way to loosen entry, tighten exit on an IMCA Sport mod. I tend to like to run my panhard bar higher than most people. I run on our sport mod cars. We run from the center of the axle housing down to the center of where the bolt is on the rear end that the panhard bar connects to is 3.5 inches. Every time I've tried running that lower, it definitely makes the car a little tight getting in. It helps it through the middle and through the off, but it can make it a little bit tight getting in. Lead, putting lead in the car helps the car get off the corner better. And explain, a lot of times people used to say the fact that, and just like they say with stagger, the lead makes the car drag down the straightaway. Well, that's old school thinking, because average car nowadays, the right side wheelbase is 3 inches longer than the left side when the car's throttled up in the middle of the corner with the left rear moving forward. So as a rule of thumb, if we put 1/4 inch of lead in there, that means we're only going to go into 2 3/4. So our static number is a little bit less, but you're always going to have a trail in the car when you're on the throttle, period. Let's see. Anthony, if you run a 4-inch backspace rim on the right rear, try a 3. Try moving the rear end to the right, some with offsets. Yeah, that's a good idea, Anthony. I agree with you there. I'm not a big fan of running that 4-inch wheel, because that, once again, that puts the car. A lot of times, guys with the 4-inch wheels, that guy that's toting that left front a foot coming off the corner, just because it's got so much side bite, and the car's stuck on the right rear so hard that when you go to throttle it up, it can't release, and so it just lifts and dumps all the weight from the left front to the right rear, and it actually makes the car, spooky tight. But you're right, moving the rear end to the right with some wheel offsets, that's definitely a good thought. A lot of times we'll even move the rear end 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch left or right, depending on what we want to accomplish with the car. With the IMCA Sport Mod, we can't run wheel spacers, so the only way we can move that rear end small amounts is by moving the rear end itself. Don, how do you get rid of a bad push coming out of the corner from mid-corner out? Excuse me. Well, more stagger, more right rear bar angle, taming the left rear down maybe a little bit. But usually, if it's a bad push coming off the corner, that means the left rear is just out tractioning the right rear. So we need to feed some traction to the right rear by putting more bar angle in it. You might put a little bit of trail in the car, static trail in the car, to help it keep turning coming off the corner. What's your thoughts, Chad?
Yeah, that's without knowing more if it's a 2-lane car or a 4-lane car, but yeah, that's a pretty good place to start.
Kyle, best place location to mount left rear chain on a USA stock car. Well, once again, if you can mount that more inboard, it's going to be a whole lot better situation. You're probably going to have to be inside the trailing arm, actually, but and Chad can actually explain it better than I can.
So the rear axle is kind of like a teeter-totter. So when you put that chain out close to the tire, it's going to be real effective picking that left rear tire off the racetrack. When you move it in here, it doesn't have as much force to pick it up, and then it actually kind of articulates around that. So if the chain is located here, it doesn't want to pick it up as much. It'll actually dig that left rear into the ground, so it'll give you more traction when you move it farther inboard, closer to the pumpkin.
Aaron, what would adding some left front anti-dive affect on the race car? If you put some more anti-dive on the left front, when you go into the corner under braking, it's going to make that left front feel stiffer. Now, as soon as you release the brake pressure, that left front's not going to be as stiff, but it could, in theory, it would tighten the car up in the corner under braking. Anthony, what's your opinion on the Z-Link rear end? I know most guys run their bars forward. Am I putting myself at a disadvantage? Old clamp car. The Z-Link car has a tremendous amount of straight line traction. The problem is the Z-Link car basically has no steer to it whatsoever. It keeps that left or that right rear pretty well straight in the car. And what happens is it also allows the car to fall over because now we don't have our upper link pushing forward and making suspension stiffness in the car itself. So back in the day when we had full-blown open motors and had an uncontrollable amount of horsepower, that Z-Link was pretty good. But once again, it wasn't the fastest thing in the middle of the corner because that transition from on the throttle, off the throttle thing. But in a drag race situation, oh buddy, it's phenomenal traction. And you want to talk about lifting the left front. Yeah, that the Z-Link will definitely help you lift the left front a foot off the ground, no problem. In my opinion, drivability, there's a disadvantage. I like the characteristics of the four link a lot better. I think it's easier to tune, and depending on, of course, what you run for a motor, like I said, it's just it has more. The four link car has more corner speed. What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, the old 4-link left rear Z-Link right rear car was pretty good, but it's exactly what you said. That thing actually was just too tight in the middle of the corner. Once we could do the wheelbase change on the right rear with the 4-link cars and make that thing rotate and continue the rotation through the middle of the corner, like you said, it was faster in that phase 2 of the corner before you needed the max traction. You didn't have to brake traction. So they were cool back in the day, but the 4-link is probably still the best.
Yeah, it just has the most amount of corner speed. Like I said, it's easier tunable or easier to tune. When Wehrs Machine made a post about lowering the table height on the right rear had side bite, can you explain on that what brain isn't making sense on that?
So the spring table is basically the distance from the ground to where your springs hook up. So on a coilover atmosphere like this, it would be where the coilovers mount to the chassis. So they're either going to be level, or the right side is going to be lower, or the right side is going to be higher. When they're level, that's kind of a neutral roll, I guess you can say. When the right side's higher, that's going to resist roll, and when the right side is lower, that's going to induce roll and make the car roll over. So I don't know what kind of car you have. If it's a coilover modified, then you would just at ride height you measure from the ground up to that shock mount location, and then do that on both sides, and then that'll tell you if the left or the right's higher. If it's like a sport mod where the screw jack car is not a coilover situation, then it's the tip of the screw jack, so and the spring height. On a coilover like this, you could have a 10-inch spring here, a 20-inch spring here, or whatever height spring you want. It only knows where that's connected to the chassis. When you separate and put the screw jack car, then it becomes a spring height and screw jack location. So like on a sport mod, if you run a 16 left rear, 13 right rear, that's automatically 3 inches of spring table. However, you need to look at it at ride height. So if you have a really soft spring in the left rear, and your screw jack is actually probably below your right rear because you got a really soft left rear, then the spring table would be higher on the right side. So there's a lot of variables that go into the non-coilover car versus the coilover car. The coilover cars are very simply from the ground to the shock bolt. And on the spring separate cars like a sport mod and stock car stuff, then it becomes a spring heights and screw jack location. And that's the same for the front. So on the front end, when the spring is separate from the shock, it's where the tip of the screw jack is and the spring height also. So a lot of variables there to look at. Again, it's kind of like a teeter-totter situation. So if I'm a teeter-totter and this side's higher, it's going to take more effort to roll that over the top of that. And if I start like this, then it just kind of wants to roll real easy. So if you think about it, the spring table kind of as a teeter-totter, that's an easy way to wrap your head around that.
Okay, Jake, IMCA modified, moving pull bar and or J-bar up or down on the rear end. What effect can I expect? Looking for more side bite. Moving the pull bar up or down on the rear end, once again, you're changing the timing aspect of it. The further we get it away from the rear end, the lazier it's going to be. The closer we put it to the rear end, the quicker it's going to respond. J-bar, once again, we move that up or down. If we move that up, what happens is now all of a sudden our roll center is higher in the rear, so that it doesn't. It actually raises the roll center up above the center of gravity to the point where it doesn't want to roll as much. When we lower it, it gets it closer to the center of gravity. So what it does is it makes the car roll more on the right rear. So moving the J-bar up will free the car up getting into the corner. Moving the J-bar down tends to tighten the car up. And when I say moving it up or down, I'm talking on the rear end. If you move the whole J-bar up, that's going to free the car up getting in. If you move the whole J-bar down, that's going to tighten the car up getting in, because once again, we're changing the location of where our actual roll center is in relationship to where our actual center of gravity is. So that's basically what's doing that. Ryan, what does needling the tire do? Well, as Shannon from Hoosier would say, you cannot. Well, when we needle a steak, we tenderize it. You cannot tenderize a tire because the rubber, it doesn't change the rubber whatsoever. Some people think it pokes holes in the tire and it will actually make the tire run cooler or whatever. I've not found that to be the case whatsoever. It basically just pokes holes in there, but it doesn't take any material out. So the tire just has a hole in it that fills right up as soon as the needle comes back out of it. It's kind of like poking a needle in your skin. Once you pull it out, there's no hole left in there. Okay, well, we've got a little bit of time here for some more questions. The spring table is one of those things that a lot of people don't understand, and that using that attribute of
teeter-totter
is the easiest way to put it in simple forms, because if you have the left rear way up and the right rear way down, the car is going to roll easily. It's not going to have that double transition where it has to roll up and then over. It just rolls over. Now, sometimes that can actually get too much, where we've had, like a lot of guys go to an 11-inch right rear spring. And for some reason, that 11-inch spring, whether it's because there's not enough coils or whatever, but that seems to tighten the car up. Like if you had a 16 and a 13 compared to a 13 and an 11, that 13 and 11 combination definitely makes the car tighter than that 16. And I think it's because, once again, our spring table is getting so low, it's getting low enough to the point where it rolls almost too freely and sticks to right rear. It's that the distance between the center of gravity and the spring table, it rolls too easy. Dave, what would cause a throttle wheel hop mid-corner to partway down the straightaway on the throttle? Sport mod, I just replaced the rear end and all of my measurements seem to be correct. 2020 Harris chassis. Well, unless the chain's too tight and you're getting up against the chain, that's a possibility. Shock wise, it might be too soft on rebound to the point where you've got real stiff compression shock with hardly any rebound. And all of a sudden that shock has kind of become a povo stick. Too much left rear trailing arm angle can cause that, because now all of a sudden you've got, too much dynamic angle in that trailing arm can cause that too. What's your opinion on that, Chad?
Yeah, it's a pogo stick or a shock problem. There's one of the arms is too straight up and down, or like you said, the rebound in the shocks, or I was thinking maybe a bind, but a bind probably wouldn't let it hop. A bind would just be bound. So
yeah, I would have to say it's too much angle in the trailing arm or a shock issue would be what, and like I said, that's one of those deals where, like, say you got a 15 compression and a 1 rebound, that shock's pretty imbalanced. It would probably need to at least be a 3 rebound to gain some control. And Frank wanted it, and that was on an IMCA Sport Mod 3 link, and I think that's kind of what we were thinking it was. Jerry, great information. Thank you, guys. Well, we appreciate that, Jerry. We do our best, and we have a good time with it. We get to hang out every other Monday night and shoot the bull. I mean, share information with you guys and tell you what I do or don't know. Tires is not necessarily my specialty. I know what I want them to do, but I don't necessarily. I can tell you one that's done this that looks good and one that doesn't look so great, but doing it, it's kind of one of those deals.
yeah, back to Shannon calling that needling a waste of time. It's way more important to get them sipes right than it is to waste your time and effort, trying to needle that tire. We tried to do that back in the day with our stuff, and we never seen any kind of gain. And then once he said that at that school, I was like, man, I sure wish I could have that time that I wasted back.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That was, Shannon was a fun one to have as a speaker. I enjoyed all of his information. He's got a tremendous amount of knowledge about tires, and I enjoyed talking to him. So if you ever see him at the racetrack, tell him hi and tell him where you heard about us, or where you heard about him, I mean. Mark, I have been my 4-link book every week since being at the class, and we have improved a lot this year, running better than we did last year. Well, that's good, Mark. That's what our objective is when we teach those classes, and we have a great time. That's probably one of the most fun projects that we do over the winter is, once again, getting together, talking about racing and talking about questions and different things, and kind of going through some scenarios. And there's a lot to learn at those classes. And in fact, we actually have all of our dates up online now. You can actually register online. We actually had 3 people register for this 2-link school today. So they are ready to go, and the dates are set. I think the Sport Mod School is January 20th and 21st. The Four Link School is, I'm thinking it's February 4th and 5th, or that first weekend in February. And then the Stock Car School is the weekend after the Daytona 500. I think it's the 25th and 26th or something like that. Don't hold me on those actual dates, but the weekend after the Daytona 500 is when we do the Stock Car School. Okay. Ronald, Chad, when will new billets be? When will the new T-shirts be available online?
Yeah, they're probably gonna be mad at me in the morning and ask why I put this on for the show tonight, because they're not available. They usually won't let me talk about or release products unless it's ready to go on the website, and I know that they probably didn't get these up there, but you can call and order them tomorrow. It looks like there's, I don't know, like 20 boxes here, so I think all sizes are here, but they should have them online in a couple days, I would think, and then we'll have them at Super Nationals too.
Dave says, thank you. I will check the shocks. Checked the shocks, wrecked it, and didn't replace those. They seem to be okay, but I could have been missing something. Well, believe it or not, we had a car, one of our customers a couple weekends ago flipped their car side over side over side. They replaced lower A-frames, tie rods, body brackets, and stuff like that. But they never thought to think about checking their shocks. And all of a sudden they go out, and then the next weekend the car is garbage. So of course their first response was, well, the car just was junk tonight. It was just junk tonight. Well, the car itself actually wasn't junk. It was the bent shims that the left rear had in it from when the car went over, and it ended up bottoming out that shock, and it bent the shims. Now, once the shock was replaced, now all of a sudden the car's back to being fast again. So, whether they look straight or whatever, if you get in a situation in a real bad, send them in. I mean, we won't charge you a dime for dynoing them. We'll dyno them for free, and let you know if the shock has a problem or not a problem. So basically, if the shock is good, you're out the shipping to get it to us and to get it back to you. So it's well worth, rather than wasting another weekend trying to figure out why the car's not working. You got to check those things. I mean, they're pretty. The insides of those shocks are pretty complex, and when something goes a different direction than they're supposed to, it has a tendency to wreck stuff. Let's see. On IMCA Sport Mod, I run 10 pounds in my left rear and 14 pounds in my right front, 12 in my right rear. Can you explain tire pressure from tacky racetrack to slick racetrack? Well, the actual tire that you're running, John, actually needs to have more air pressure in it than that. That's a kind of a DOT type tire, and they don't have a lot of sidewall flex. So what happens is when you underinflate them, they end up having a situation where they cup the tire, because the tire goes to bend, and then it bends on the actual tread of the tire. So like your right front, 14 is probably fine. I tend to run 15, but that right rear, on a heavy racetrack, I'd run 15 pounds in that right rear. Maybe on a slick racetrack, I would go down to 14. But once again, we that tire's not designed like a drag tire where it wrinkles the sidewalls and keeps the tread straight. These actually have too much sidewall to the point where it wrinkles the tread, and you actually end up less tread on the ground on the surface of the racetrack than you have. I have a 16-inch spring on my left rear slider and noticed it's coming loose during droop. Should it be making contact the whole time? Do I need to preload it a little bit more? Lester, I would definitely say you need to preload that a little bit more. You don't, in my opinion, you're better off if it doesn't come loose. It doesn't necessarily have to have a ton of load in it, but still, it needs to have some preload in it so that the spring doesn't have that loose feeling where it gets loose and then it transitions and gets staggered in there.
That could have been that hop too. I guess I never thought of that, but if you don't have spring tension, then back to the question of the wheel hop.
Oh,
if you don't have spring tension, if your left rear is just dangling there and you're just on the rods, that would possibly be.
Oh yeah, that would be a good point. If you didn't have any preload in that spring, that's creating a situation where you're just on the rods and on the shock, and then all of a sudden the spring's not doing anything. That could create a hop easily. Very good point. Very good point. Okay, Spencer. Wait a minute. Lester. We did Lester. Andrew. Stuffing tires. What do you prefer on grit or those rough needle wheels? I'm not a huge believer in those rough needle wheels. I like that good old 35 grit. That seems to work pretty good. It doesn't kill the tire. It just gets the film off of it. The problem with that needle deal is that it just rips the heck out of the tire. Like if you sipe the tire, then you try needling it with that. Now all of a sudden you're going against the sipes that you did because you're ripping half of them out. And I'm not a fan of that needler. It makes a heck of a lot of smoke, but I'm not a fan of it. I like that 36 grit or 36 grit wheel is what I use or what I've always recommended. Spencer, do you feel there's a maximum amount of bar angle that can be achieved on the left rear dynamic, or would it just be determined by the left rear starting to povo? I think anytime you get over that 50 degrees, 50 degrees is actually pretty much pushing it, because we're getting to that point where it's starting to stand up, and it's definitely going to start trying to povo stick if you get much more than that 50 degrees. I think 50 degrees is acceptable. We run between 45 and 50 degrees. It seems like every time I've tried more than that, you can kind of get that bar lock thing where it tries to povo stick the car a little bit, and it makes the car, well, then all of a sudden it puts all your suspension in your tire, and the tire's not designed for that. Thoughts on spring table on an INCA stock car, 150 16-inch left rear and a 250 11-inch right rear. Well, with that combination, you're still going to have, I'm going to say when that left rear is compressed, you're still going to have 3.5 degrees of spring table. That 11-inch spring might give you too much roll. That might be that car that's toting that left front a little bit. It definitely is going to give you some side bite, but like I said, I'm not just a huge fan of that 11-inch spring. It just seems to me like it lowers that spring table down too far. I don't think it has the amount of coils to make it comfortable in these cars. I'm just not a huge fan of that 11-inch spring. I've just not had great success. And you're right, with that 250 left rear spring. Every time I've ran an 11-inch spring, I've had to go ungodly stiff to make the deal work. And sometimes I'm not sure that's as user friendly. Josh, you can answer this question for me. Does that lift the left front quite a bit on your car? So what do you got? Any races or anything next weekend, Chad?
I guess I'm not sure if I'm going anywhere or not. I'll have to check the schedule.
Find out tomorrow morning's meeting.
Yeah. See what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
I think we're just thrashing, getting ready for Super Nationals is the plan. I don't think we have any factory support plans before that one. That's a big week. Takes a lot of prep. So.
Well, okay, Josh, first time going to try it.
I have a 13-inch.
Yeah, I have a 13-inch spring with you. 225 13-inch spring with you in the trailer just in case. And I'd probably, if you have time, I'd scale it with that too beforehand, just in case, because my gut feeling is it's going to tote the left front to the point where it might make it have lots of traction off the corner, but getting into the corner can get a little bit flaky. Well, we've got about 3 minutes left, so we can take a few more questions if you've got any more questions. My weekend, I don't know, I'm toying with the idea of going to Boone, but then again, I don't know if I want to make 3 weekends in a row at Boone. I'm just toyed with the idea. They've kind of got their Super National tune-up thing, they call it, and then
Prelude to the Prelude.
Yeah, then there's another name that they have for it. I don't know. I know we're supposedly I guess we're a sponsor, but I don't remember the actual name that they called it. So it'll be a good night. I know they'll have, it's a redraw program this weekend at Boone. So that's going to be a neat deal where, like Chad said, prelude to the prelude. So guys that are wanting to come run another night before that all happens, it'll be a nice night to come to Boone Speedway and get some laps around that place. Lester is running a 600 gear and can't keep pace, get pulled off the line. Which way should I go if I'm changing gears? Well, it's hard. That's a tough question for me to let you. I mean, if you're spinning, then you definitely would need to go down into the 5s. If the motor's lugging, you would need to go up in the 6s. I would talk to some of your competitors that you're running with and kind of see what gears that they're running at that racetrack, because it's hard for me to really say. Biggest thing, like I said, if you're spinning, I'd go to something in the 5s, and if you're lugging the motor, then I think you definitely need to go into something in the lower 6s. IMCA Sport, my good starting on front springs. Well, like I said, once our 3-piece stuff, we've been running softer. Like we've been running a pair of 500s in the front of our cars. The single-piece Pinto spindle, that particular one, we always ran a 550 in the right front with a 500 in the left front. Are you guys going to be at Fairbury? No, I will not be at Fairbury.
It's the Saturday before Super Nationals. We'll be at Super Nationals.
Oh, Mark says North Wilkesboro gear and setup for name on it. I would have no clue. I've been there one time to a pavement race, and other than that, the only time I've ever seen that, so I couldn't tell you. Jacob, right front helix, any insight? Weight transfer, trail braking, shock valving. That's a lot of questions, Jacob, but I can definitely answer that right front helix insight. It's very important to have that helix locked in. Chad's got a Wehrs machine, makes a really nice deal to lock that spring in place so that it stays in the helix. If you move it out of the helix, the spring doesn't operate the same, and it can get progressive rated in certain rates, in certain movement through its movement. So it's very important the spring is designed to have that full helix in that spring. AJ, do you like soft left rear setup with the sport mod? How can I get my GRT to work out the soft left rear on a dry slick racetrack? I've got mixed emotions on that. I've had decent success in both ways. That soft left rear, you've got to preload it quite a bit, and that's kind of a problem. Sometimes if you get too much preload in those springs with a 13-inch spring, then all of a sudden your spring table is kind of wrong, to the point where your spring table on your left rear is shorter than your right rear. I still like the 175 left rear with a 225 right rear setup. That seems to work really well for what we've done most of the time. But I know some guys that are running that 125 left rear preloaded and have had pretty good luck with it. I can't really tell you the setup. Like I said, they're putting a lot of preload in that spring and making it work that way. Well, appreciate that, Todd. We always glad to hear from you. I'm glad you were listening, and we'll gonna call her a night. Thanks, Chad. Thank you guys for all listening and listening to what we have to say. Great questions again, and we will see you in 2 weeks, which will be 2 weeks.
We doing it from Super Nationals?
Well, it looks like 2 weeks would be doing it from Super Nationals. So we'll have to figure that out. Can't guarantee we'll get that done. All depends on the Wi-Fi and the electronics side of that thing, if we can do that. That one year we did that at Motorsports, I thought that worked out actually better than last year doing it in a trailer, because last year in the trailer was extremely hot and everybody was about to pass out.
I got a better air conditioning unit now.
Well, you got a better, oh yeah, that's right. You got a better trailer now. I forgot all about that. Yeah, that'd probably work out pretty slick. So if we can get the Wi-Fi to work, that'll be the plan. Monday night, September 5th. So we will plan on hopefully seeing you guys all then. Thanks again, Chad. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a good night.